I think you run into the question of like what happens next for Russia, because the expansionist nature of like Russia and the expansionist nature of the United States have overlapping interests now in Eastern Europe. So there are a lot of other countries that are going to be in the crosshairs going forward after this conflict.
Okay, I don't. The expansionist nature of Russia and the expansionist nature of the U.S. or whatever are not the same thing. Like Finland asked to join NATO after Ukraine was invaded by fucking Russia. Ukraine wanted to be in NATO. Poland blackmailed its way into NATO, and then also it said that deal was like partially from Orban, right? Like it doesn't. Isn't
Yes.
Viktor Orban of Hungary like pretty like authoritarian and also friendly with Putin?
Yes. To
So
some
like
extent.
if I don't trust that if Trump is praising Putin and Trump is willing to look at a deal made by Viktor Orban, who took Hungary from a democracy to only like a partial democracy, and Viktor Orban is also praising Putin, I am not convinced that deal will be favorable to Ukraine.
This means that Ukraine does have interest in working with like Western countries like the EU, NATO, etc., but simultaneously has this distrust for Russia as a result of the history of Russia letting them down in regards to the contracts that they established. And then Russia gets very heavy-handed and wants things like an invasion.
If you want to see more content like this, I would really appreciate you liking and subscribing. It really helps with the algorithm. And make sure to check out the Discord and other social links in the description.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. How about you?
Oh, going well. It's been a while, man.
Yeah. Well, the boss has not streamed in a while, right? Putin got him too, so
Yeah, by the looks of it.
yeah. So what?
Yeah, Ukraine, right?
Yeah. I'm just curious what you think Trump is gonna do.
Um, it's a tough one because I think that I guess this is strange to say as someone who's not like typically someone who falls in line ideologically with like the Trump decisions, but I actually talked about how the proposal that he originally made when talking about Ukraine was actually the exact same proposal that I had made back in like late 2023, early 2024. So basically, to my understanding of what the original proposal that he had is that he said that he wants to redraw basically like an armistice line, and that would be along the current front line of the battlefield in Ukraine near the Dnipro River. And what would happen is there would be the eastern part of Ukraine, which would be largely controlled by the Russian military, and there would be no Ukrainian forces or NATO forces that would be allowed into that area. Then there would be the western part of Ukraine, where like NATO forces and an independent Ukrainian military was allowed to reside and maintain control over that part of Ukraine. I believe he proposed a 6-year or an 8-year, I can't remember, ceasefire that would result in either a negotiation being done regarding the contested territories in the west, or sorry, in the east, and would ensure Ukraine the necessary territories in the west to be able to either advocate for or start to expand the previously established NATO partnership that they currently had. And he said that if the ceasefire was broken, then what would happen is if Russia broke the ceasefire agreement, that he would allow Ukraine to be able to use long-range ballistic weapons provided by the United States to be able to fire deeper into Russian territories, allowing them to attack places like Orenburg, which is a major spot for oil refineries and distributions, as well as some of the larger military like production facilities in Russia. And if Ukraine broke the ceasefire agreement, then he would no longer send weapons and aid into Ukraine to help them in the war. So I think this is,
So,
for the
well,
most part, a pretty decent idea.
I mean, I guess I don't think I fully agree with it, but what's the evidence for Trump supporting this? Just that he like who has articulated this plan that Trump has worked with? I don't.
I don't remember exactly who it was, but it was someone off of the Trump team that basically said that this was the goal once he gets into office, and that that this is the sort of thing that he wants to shoot for. And I mean, if nothing else, I think it's semi important to take people at their word if they want to do something like this, because I think it would be like better than just doing nothing or just completely giving up on Ukraine or anything else like that. I legitimately think that he realizes that he has to have some level of support and that he has to make some negotiations regarding the Ukrainian war.
I mean, I guess it's so hard for me to know what Trump is gonna do. I think I think he has different people in his administration who want to do a lot of different things in Ukraine. Like we know, like I mean, I just got sent this clip, by the way. I sent it in like general. Trump saying like, oh, it's you've probably seen it before. You know, Zelensky's the greatest salesman. Every time he comes here, he walks away with $1 billion or whatever. I think it's I remember reading about this earlier. There was one advisor, General Keith Kellogg, who I think Trump's worked with before, who I know for sure wants to take NATO membership off the table as well. Although you said in your plan or whatever that it wouldn't be full NATO membership, right? It would be like NATO membership for Western Ukraine, but then the independent Ukrainian military would have to control the parts closer to east, like.
Correct. So, well, no, it would be the Russian military controlling the parts in the east and an independent
Why?
/
Yeah,
NATO-backed
near
one
the
in
border.
west, yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah, correct. And just to be clear, he said that under this proposal as well, that he would continue arms sales to Ukraine during the 6 or 8 year like ceasefire plan that he had originally proposed. And that's he specifically talked about cutting like aid to Ukraine and switching over to sales of arms and aid to Ukraine. He believes that like the United States should help Ukraine, however, we should do it through sales of weapons and aid rather than donations of such.
I guess I like okay. I mean, again, you keep saying he. I have never seen Trump
Yeah, the
articulate
advisor.
anything about Ukraine other than it wouldn't have happened if he was president and he would get it done within 24 hours. And he's already basically walked back the second half of that. But I guess it seems I would have to know. Can you find which advisor it was? Because I think there are different advisors are going to tell him different things. It's hard for me to know what he's actually going to end up doing. Like,
yeah, I could try to look this up. I remember I was reading it somewhere or another because someone posted something about it in a Discord that I was in that I am now banned from.
based. All right. Yeah, there was a plan that Kellogg authored with I don't know who Fred Fleets is. I don't think this guy's ever even had a position in government. I think he's just a like think tank dude. But it says Trump would supply more weapons to Kiev only if it agreed to peace talks. At the same time, he would warn Moscow that he would increase aid to Ukraine if Russia rejected negotiations. NATO membership for Ukraine would be put on hold. Although it doesn't mention like if they get to be part of the whatever partnership for peace and stuff like that. But
Yeah, so it was this guy named Mike Waltz, the U.S. National Security Advisor pick, who talked about this plan.
okay.
I don't have all of the details, but I have some reports on it. I'll try to find the actual like thing that he said.
Sure. I mean, you can send the reports. I'm like, as long as they're from whatever reputable source, like I'm gonna trust. For the most part, they're not.
It was
just like making
the
it
first
up.
one that popped up was from Yahoo News. So,
Well, if you could find like a Reuters, a New York Times, that'd be.
So yeah, I got an article here that talks about. This is from the Kiev Independent. That I'm gonna post it in the chat. This says that the truce proposal, I assume of the alleged ceasefire that they were originally talking about, was declined, apparently. I guess there was Hungary, Ukraine, Russia, and some other countries that were involved. And they've given up on the plan that I just described. which I guess
Yeah.
makes the my explaining of it kind of untimely and unfortunate because it seemed like it would have been the best plan, but that kind of happens when you don't keep up with these things. And this was just posted like 3 days ago, so that's
Sure. Yeah. No, I see. Yeah. But this is Trump team will take a hard look at Orban's proposal for a Christmas truce. Like this is I don't know if okay. So here's a question: how much do you trust? Do you think Trump like actually likes Putin, or do you think like what do you think of Trump's rhetoric about Putin? Like all the odd things he seems to have praised him for.
um I do think that Trump likes Putin. I think that there's something about like authoritarian style, like almost dictatorships, you could say, that I think Trump flirts a lot with, considering like his relationship with Kim Jong Un, Vladimir
Yeah,
Putin, and some other people like oh God, what is his name?
like Viktor
Saudi
Orban in
Arabia.
Hungary, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Mohammed bin Salman, I think.
I don't know.
Um,
I just the Saudi princes. I know. I don't think I ever say his name. Like,
Yeah, Muhammad bin Salman, that's his name. I was correct. But yeah, it seems like he likes to flirt with this idea of like authoritarianism that borderlines on like dictatorship in some circumstances. So I think like I think he does like Putin in that regard, but I think that the reason that he likes Putin isn't necessarily because of that. I think it's because of a lot of the like policy positions being implemented in Russia. So I don't necessarily think that it's because of the position that Putin is in. I think it's because of the things that Putin is doing.
sure. I guess so. When you say this would have been the best deal or whatever, do you think that's just is that like pragmatic or is that like moral? Like, do you think this was a fair deal for Ukraine, or is this just like a pragmatic, like it's the best we could have gotten, or?
Yeah, I think it's probably the best we could have gotten because when I originally talked about like the Ukrainian strategy back in late 2023, early 2024, I was saying that I believe that if Ukraine like wants to put an end to the war, they have to do something drastic to be taken a little bit more seriously by the Russians, since they can just simply overwhelm them by force. And they have to sort of bring like the war to the Russians to let them see like what kind of impact it can really have. And I originally talked about how like I thought that if Ukraine wanted to be to make like a drastic move that they should strike Orenburg, because Orenburg is one of the major oil production and distribution facilities in Russia, and it's only like 140 or 170 kilometers from the Ukrainian border where the war is happening. So it's definitely within distance of them to be able to hit, and it would hurt the Russian economy, which was already like one of the sort of weaker areas that Russia is looking at in regards to like where they could hurt them the most. And it seemed like that was something that Trump had originally wanted to put on the table, but now has since walked back as of recently, which is unfortunate because I think that if you're going to make a ceasefire proposal, and if Russia does end up breaking that ceasefire proposal, being able to take the war directly to them shows like some level of, I mean, you could argue that it's like an aggression or that it's an intensification of things. But I think it's like, even if it is a provocation of the war, like it needs something like that needs to happen.
Sure. I guess okay. I mean, I'm not. I guess for one, I'm not like super convinced that if the war kept going on for like 3 years, which you might not think is optimal, that Russia would be able to sustain the losses it's had. From what I've read, it seems like Russia is their economy is struggling to some extent, and they are losing a lot of tanks. And it seems like so long as the West can increase their shell production or whatever, if we haven't already, we should be able to sustain it longer than Russia can. And then I guess not having, if Ukraine is giving up its territory, some of its territory, I feel like NATO membership sooner than 6 years it should be on the table at least. Like,
That's fair. I just think that the United States doesn't want to associate with Ukraine because of how corrupt their government is. There's a lot of like cyber terrorism, cyber scamming, etc., that comes out of Ukraine.
Sure.
And I think that it's a security risk to the United States for us to associate with them, and it would cost more in like infrastructure and like policing than we would get out of it to be able to rectify that situation. And as a result, I think the United States wants to put in minimal effort to get out the maximum amount of profit or benefit from the Ukraine situation. So it's just a matter of giving Ukraine something or giving them enough to ensure that we're able to like have good ties with the Ukrainians while simultaneously not overextending the things that we want to the point where it becomes a detriment to us because we don't have much to gain from Ukraine. And like when you talk about the Russian economy, 100%, like the Russian losses that are being sustained is like it's pretty bad. Like there's a lot of people dying in Ukraine on both sides. Unfortunately, Russia being the larger country with a much larger fighting force that are now even employing North Koreans, and even in some cases, like I believe Chechens are coming in to fight on the side of Russia as well. We're seeing a replacement of the standard like army and even in some cases like the destroyed navy divisions going into Russia to be able to play defense just to ensure that the Ukrainians don't push past a certain point to keep them in line. And I think if it comes down to a war of attrition, Russia could possibly win. But that is sort of the problem is like the longer you give Russia to be able to recuperate and recover, the more they're going to be able to do with the things that they're able to work with. And as a result of that, that's why I think like something, as I said, something more drastic has to be done relatively quickly. But I think that playing your cards incorrectly and just simply saying, put the pedal to the metal and make them realize like that they can't just, go to war or whatever is also like a terrible mistake because the consequences could be even more drastic and even more problematic for the Ukrainian people.
What would be the negative for? Well, you say Ukrainian people. I mean, presumably more Ukrainians would die than like if we had a ceasefire or whatever. But what would be like the huge negative for the Ukrainians other than that?
Well, as you stated before, like either they would have to negotiate giving up territory and control of some level of their economic sector because they would have to reestablish their trade ties with Russia, where other countries don't want to pick it up because they don't necessarily need the grain exports or the like coal exports that were coming out of Ukraine. And obviously, Russia doesn't necessarily have an incentive to give them the same contracts that they did before as a result of the war and the damage to the infrastructure on Russia's side. So, I mean, it's just going to result in a poorer Ukraine that has to either export equal amounts or more than prior to be able to get their economic status back up to where it used to be.
We don't think. Why would Europe no longer need the grain exports? Like, don't they still need some of the grain exports from Ukraine? Isn't that why? Isn't that a big deal for them? Like,
Yeah, it is. So, but the problem is, as the Ukrainians started having to deal more and more with the Russians along some territorial lines in Ukraine, we actually found substitute contracts for a lot of the grain exports that we were doing. And as a result of that, I mean, sure, if the Ukrainians could offer us grain at a cheaper price than what we're getting it under our current contracts, then I'm sure we'd be more than happy to buy it. But again, it's the fact that you run into the issue of, is that going to happen? And I think it's fine to say, sure, it will. But I mean, it's kind of one of those toss ups.
yeah, I guess I just don't. Like Ukraine was already, I mean, before the war, was on path to join the EU, right? Like the whole Euromaidan issue was over, like EU membership. I guess I'm just like, I mean, NATO membership gets complicated with territorial disputes, but like, I guess I don't see like a bit like any peace deal would probably lead to EU membership at some point in my mind. Like,
Possibly. It's tough because I think that NATO and the EU want to bring Ukraine into like the sphere of influence. It's obvious that they wanted to do this for a while. I think going all the way back to like 2008, there was originally partnership that was proposed to Ukraine by NATO and by some other European forces. But I think the problem is that A, there's so much corruption in Ukraine, and B, there's so much crime in Ukraine that they don't want to take on the responsibility of having to police Ukraine because it would cost more to do so than we would possibly be getting out of it.
I mean, maybe. I mean, we were spending like National Endowment for Democracy money, like into Ukraine to try to help them with their corruption stuff. But I mean, I guess like I am way more confident. I'm way more confident that these issues would actually be fixed if they join the EU, or at least had like a I presume I know there's some requirements EU countries have to have when it comes to like corruption stuff. Presumably, these would have been easier fixed if Russia didn't invade, and like if and with a reasonable peace deal that can put them on a path to EU membership. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it's very likely. I think that if the United States or the EU got involved, I think it would make it easier for them to fix the corruption to some extent. But as we know, when the United States does get involved, there's also a level of corruption that gets introduced because of exporting wealth and like resources. And so it's just substituting one corruption that is detriment to the state and to like the economy for another one that's just a detriment to the economy, which isn't necessarily like worse, I guess. But it's still a tough one because there's this idea, right, that it can be overhauled or that it can be fixed. But you got to remember, like, the United States, at the very least, has been meddling in Ukraine since like 2008. And the reason that we haven't expanded our influence or resources there to the extent that we could have is because of the fact that like this corruption stands in the way of us being able to make money and have influence in the way that we want it there. And I don't know. It's like certainly, as I said before, like a partnership or a union or something would help. But I just don't think that the United States is interested in investing the time and effort into fixing those problems right now.
I mean, wasn't most of this like meddling in Ukraine like anti-corruption stuff? Like,
so there was anti-corruption stuff, but as far as I know, that there were some contracts that were made with United States. What is the name of it? I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, contractors from the United States were making deals in Ukraine, specifically in regards to like security stuff and also infrastructure deals. And I know that a large percentage of the contracts that were done through the previous Obama administration, through either the Bidens or other government contractors that were working in Ukraine, were also largely a part of infrastructure deals as well to set up, I guess, what they considered to be some level of necessary infrastructure to implement like new means of like transport or transit, and also like new private sectors for either trading or selling like goods in Ukraine.
I mean, it doesn't sound. I mean, okay. I'm not convinced U.S. corruption in Ukraine is like a huge issue. This just seems like so. This does not seem like that solid of a thing to me. What's the allegation exactly? U.S. companies
the
are.
allegation is that likely what would happen if the United States were to give a larger or more overarching investment into Ukraine, that it would likely be at some level of detriment to the Ukrainians, even if it's not to the same level of detriment to the system that they currently have now or what is being proposed by the alternative. And the reason for that is because it seems like generally when the United States makes these infrastructure projects or these security projects, the goal is to export some level of wealth from these countries. And as a result of that, it would end up being just another either a proxy state for the United States, because we know that the United States doesn't want to make a full investment into Ukraine, or it would put it would put Ukraine in a circumstance where, sure, they would be substituting one bad system for another less bad system. But it seems like if they were able to fix things like more independently, that would be a better outcome for them. However, it seems like they don't have the want or resources to do that independently.
I can understand them not having the resources to like do it independently, but to me that just makes like that's a stronger argument for meddling in Ukraine, for trying to fix some of the corruption. I guess I I don't know. I'm not convinced that like most of the. I think most of the relationships the U.S. has with like investing in other countries or whatever tends to be mutually beneficial, even if we are like to some extent like extracting wealth or whatever. Like it's also just like beneficial to the country being invested in.
Oh, sure. And, as someone who lives in the United States, I think that it's probably in the best interest of like the United States to be able to get and to hold some level of power or a position of power where they can have this means to be able to negotiate these contracts for trade and for exporting wealth, because I would rather, you know, call me individualistic or whatever, but I would rather that the United States benefit from this than somewhere else, because at least I get to see some level of benefit from that. I exist in a position of privilege where if the United States gets to be like the global hegemon and they get to decide how power structures work, that's somewhat fine with me, because I don't want to give up that position of privilege. I don't want it to be like the United States has to worry about getting invaded or has to worry about economic collapse every third year like some countries in Europe do. And so, I mean, yes, I can understand why this would be a good thing, but also I can see where long term an investment into Ukraine could potentially be a bad thing as well, because of how unstable and how corrupt the Ukrainian government and economy is.
Do you think but like, it seems like Ukrainians generally wanted to be more integrated with the West. They wanted to join the EU. Like, they protested and fucking kicked Yanukovych out because he threw out that EU deal. Like,
Oh yeah, no, I don't deny that. I just think that the reason that they want to be associated with it is just because they've had so many bad relations with Russia. Like the Russian government set up quite a few contracts with Ukraine that they failed to uphold. And this is something that isn't really talked about as much about the Ukrainian war. But Putin himself did touch on this a little bit, where he talked about how there were land contracts that were set up with Ukraine a long time ago when the USSR fell, and then there was a reformation of countries, and I guess what you would call the Balkanization of Eastern Europe. And the reason that I think that this is somewhat relevant is because it shows that when Ukraine got its independence and was able to form itself as its own country, and as well as the other countries in question that did so, Russia seemed to have these contracts set up in a specific way where they wanted a specific amount of money or they wanted a specific thing from Ukraine. And then in exchange, Russia would do X thing for them. And there was never any real talk about what X thing was. It was just alluded that it was like security and economic stuff. But it seems that the overarching idea that Ukraine has proposed is that Russia was not upholding its end of the contracts. And so they sought out other contractors to be able to try to get the things that wasn't being met for their state, to allow them to have some level of expansionism or growth in their economic sector. And when they did that, they reached out to the United States and other Western countries. And this is something that made Russia very upset. Now, if this is true, and I'm willing to say that I believe it probably is, because it seems like something that would happen realistically, this means that Ukraine does have interest in working with like Western countries like the EU, NATO, etc., but simultaneously has this distrust for Russia as a result of the history of Russia letting them go down in regards to the contracts that they established. And then Russia gets very heavy-handed and wants things like an invasion or a war when Ukraine says, I'm sick of your shit, Russia. We need to find someone else to help meet the needs of our country that you're not giving us.
okay, so I mean, I guess I don't really disagree with you there, but I guess like the implication is like Russia's not out up there into the deal on things. I don't know how you feel about like how you feel about the Budapest memorandum too, and like some of that stuff. And now you're asking, and broadly, people in Ukraine want to be integrated with the West for whatever reason. I mean, I agree in large part because they've had a bad history with Russia. But now you're asking Ukraine to give up some of their territory to Russia, and then at least partially give up their ability to be integrated into the West, at least with regards to like NATO membership and maybe even EU membership to some extent. Like, that just seems like an unreasonable thing to ask of them. Like,
Oh no, I agree completely. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little naive in this regard, but if let's, I guess let's run with that, right? If we have a circumstance where Ukraine gives up the territories in the east, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, to Russia. And then the territories in the west, they're allowed to do with what they want. If there was some form of proposed contract, let's just say hypothetically, if Trump gets into office and says, how about this? The eastern territories go to Russia, the western territories controlled by NATO. Everybody who wants to pick sides, go to the place of your choosing, and then we cut it there. I think that this could also be like a good situation because if the Luhansk and Donetsk territories, which previously had, at least to my understanding, some level of like insurgent or what we would call like terrorist groups, and I use that word very lightly in air quotes because everything's called a terrorist nowadays. But if they had insurgent groups that were already trying to fight back and then like destabilize the region and claim independence, I don't know why Ukraine would want those areas anyways, because they would just continue to be a thorn in the side of the Ukrainian government when they were trying to expand and establish new contracts anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a deal I would be, like, relatively favorable towards, too. You know, I don't think, at this point, I don't think most of the regions occupied by Russia are, I don't know if Ukraine can win them back. I mean, maybe they could leverage the Kursk region they invaded, but, like, B, they're probably just going to be, like, socioeconomic, black holes, even if they are accepted into Ukraine. So I don't even know what economic value they would provide to them at this point. So
yeah, no, and I tend to agree. And it's not just that they would be an economic black hole; it's that they would also likely be a security threat. Because if we have an entire nation state or vassal state that is aligning with Russia, and which is operating within NATO territories, then they're likely going to be trying to spy on us as we're trying to spy on them. This just increases tensions between Russia and the United States, and I don't think that that's good for anyone, especially since the United States just recently tripled its land border with Russia when we got Finland, Norway, and Sweden into NATO, and then we set up communications bases all along the new territory lines with Russia, and we're even able to intercept Russian communications. And now, as a result of that, Russia is moving a lot of their communications infrastructure and networks away from the newly expanded NATO border along those countries' borderlines. And I think that they're probably already planning to do this to some extent if they get some level of territory control in Ukraine. So it seems like the better outcome might be actually just Ukraine giving up some level of territory to the Russians. But the problem is, I think you run into the question of what happens next for Russia, because the expansionist nature of Russia and the expansionist nature of the United States have overlapping interests now in Eastern Europe. So there are a lot of other countries that are going to be in the crosshairs going forward after this conflict.
Okay, the expansionist nature of Russia and the expansionist nature of the U.S. or whatever are not the same thing. Like, Finland asked to join NATO after Ukraine was invaded by fucking Russia. Ukraine wanted to be in NATO. Poland blackmailed its way into NATO. A lot of these Eastern European countries want to be part of the West. They beg to be part of the West, and we initially didn't even want them. We didn't want to do NATO expansion because these Eastern European countries were a problem for us, but they wanted it so badly that I think what Poland did is it was talking to I forget who it was at the time, but the opposition party to try to get a deal to join NATO from the opposition party that before the presidential election happened. They're so not equivalent to me that it's insane.
Oh, yeah, no,
we talk about it this way.
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about Finland, Sweden, Norway. I'm talking more about countries that we are typically seeing along the Russian border. Obviously Kazakhstan is very heavily tied to Russia. Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, pretty heavily tied to Russia as well. Russia is making a lot more headroom with Turkey as a result of us turning down the jet program with them a couple of years ago, and us being unwilling to give the necessary military support that Turkey wants. Obviously Russia recently got pushed out of Syria. But there are a lot of places in the Middle East and along the European border where the interests overlap of the United States and of Russia. And those are more or less places I'm talking about, not up in the north with the the Nordic countries.
Sure, I guess. Well, I guess if you don't think Trump's going to do that deal, what exactly do you think Trump is going to do? Do you think he's just going to do some deal similar where we...
It's tough
Or
to say. He's such a wild card, man. Like,
yeah, yeah, okay.
what he's gonna do at any given time changes by the day. Like that's like asking me what the wind, is gonna be like tomorrow. No
Sure.
one knows.
And then also, it said that deal was like partially from Orban, right? Like, it doesn't. Isn't
Yes,
Viktor
correct.
Orban of Hungary like pretty like authoritarian and also friendly with Putin?
Yes. To
So
some
like,
extent, he is.
if I don't trust that if Trump is praising Putin and Trump is willing to look at a deal made by Viktor Orban, who took Hungary from a democracy to only like a partial democracy, and Viktor Orban is also praising Putin, I am not convinced that deal will be favorable to Ukraine, and I'm worried that it's going to be a shit show. But yeah,
Oh no, I agree. I think that any circumstance where Ukraine has to give up territory isn't favorable to Ukraine. But I dread to say this because I hate giving air space to the dumb tankies. But like, I don't think that at this point there's going to be a deal that is proposed where Ukraine doesn't have to give up any territory, just because the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, as I said before, are such a thorn in the side of Ukraine that even if they were to maintain control over them, I fear that like insurgent groups or independence groups would likely try to branch off as an independent territory and just join Russia anyways. So I think it's
wow.
probably in the best interest
PPG
to
wins again.
probably do that.
Okay, his predictions always right. Okay, PPG win.
I mean, PPG was saying that like Kiev would fall in a weekend. So
He also said Kamala was going to win the election, although I
yeah.
did too, but not. I think he said Kamala was literally going to win every swing state. So
I mean, I was saying Kamala wasn't going to win because I started following I started following whatchamacallit, reports of votes that were coming in by state and
yeah, like the early voting. Yeah.
early voting all the way from October 16th. And like Kamala was up on October 16th. And every day, more and more votes came in. Her lead shrunk more and more and more to the point where she was only ahead by like 2 million leading up to like November. So like I knew she was going to lose.
Yeah, I didn't. I was confident until the very end. Okay, I thought Pennsylvania was going to flip. Okay, I had hope. I had hope. It did not work out. The keys
Yeah.
did not save us. The 13 keys did not save me, unfortunately.
But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one, like I said. I don't really like. I guess this is one of the situations where I'm glad I stopped working in politics and covering the Ukraine war because it's just gotten to a point where it's like so dumb and complex that I don't think that there's any sort of meaningful solution at this point, really. Like it's going to have to be something that is a compromise that neither side is appeased on and will probably just default on or go back to their original agenda within a few years anyways.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Is there I don't know, anything else you want to talk about? Or
Oh, I mean, I don't know. It's up to you. I was just coming in here to help you kill time because you seem like you wanted to talk about it.
oh no, yeah, don't worry. Listen, I got 22 hours at least to kill, apparently. Okay, so yeah, I was just curious what you thought Trump was going to do in Ukraine because it feels like people give me contradictory answers, but I think I gotta read a bit more of this book and then play Fortnite with my friends.
That's tough.
But they added SpongeBob to Fortnite, so it's awesome.
I can't play Fortnite. I'm gonna be honest. I can't stand it.
This guy, Boomer over here.
I am a boomer.
This guy.
I've just been playing Cyberpunk. Like I've just
Oh my god. Actual
missed Night
Boomer.
City.
What the hell? Actually, I guess that's not the most Boomer game you could be playing. You could be playing, like, I don't know, fucking chess. Like a real Boomer nerd loser. I bet you do play chess. You seem like you would play chess. You seem like you would do that.
I do play a little bit of chess, but that's because I was forced to. When I was younger, my dad forced me to join chess club. So I didn't have a choice. I had to learn chess. I started at like the age of 7.
All right. Makes sense. Okay, well, anything else?
No, that is all.
All right.
Hey,
Thanks.
Antarctics? Hello.
Antarctica. All right. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you have a good one, man. It's always
You too, man.
It's always a pleasure.
If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.